Despite his transgressions of the last month, I'm not worried about Myles Garrett being bought in 2025. You shouldn't be either. I'll explain coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Myles Garrett will be bought in for 2025. Two more names on our quarterback big board, and a Joe Flacco reunion would actually be a bad idea. I'll explain and talk about all those things here coming up, but I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you will find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, and of course, at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comment section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. So we know the Myles Garrett extension was announced on Sunday, brings an end, brings a conclusion, a resolution to the standoff between the Browns and Myles Garrett after he requested a trade a little over a month ago, leading into the Super Bowl, and sort of took the NFL world by storm. It's been the hottest topic, one of the hottest topics in the NFL over the course of the last month. And it all comes to a close here suddenly and abruptly and surprisingly with the contract extension, $123.5 million guaranteed, the no trade clause that's thrown in there, $40 million, upwards of $40 million per year, which obviously changes a lot in terms of the landscape of football and other guys that are going to get paid around the league, most notably maybe in your own division, Jamar Chase, and what money he can expect. But it's always interesting. Like in the aftermath of these things, there's a lot said about, well, if the player doesn't want to be here, how will this whole situation impact their ability to play hard or care or their want to or their desire that following season or in years to come, if you will. And I understand where that comes from. It is human nature to think about the idea of, like, if you want out of something, you check out, right? Like we all sort of do this, whether it's like at a job where we're done. We're trying to find new jobs. We're done. We've gotten to our limit. I think we've all been in situations like that. I've been in situations like that, and you just kind of check out, and your work isn't quite as good, and you start to sort of lose a step, if you will, because you're not as focused into it. And I compare it to the job situation because for Myles, football, the NFL, it is a job to him. So the same thing sort of applies. And yeah, I do understand where there's that human nature thought and why that would sort of be where people's minds go. But I want to remind people as well that this is not unique just to Myles Garrett and the Browns. There are plenty of examples of players who have put out there and gone out there and asked for a trade, and they get back to their team and they play hard and they're still important to the team's success. There's a number of examples in the division. And there's some other examples just over the course of history with the Browns and in Cleveland that I think we can point to as well. Let me just start with like some obvious ones from like recent memory, like Matthew Stafford, for example, this offseason. He was given permission to seek a trade. He went out, put some feelers out there, talked to some teams, decided where he did or didn't want to go. And in the end, he decided the best bet was, I'm coming back to LA. I'm staying in LA and going to be with the Rams. You think he's not going to show up and play hard just because he explored the trade possibilities that were out there? No, like it's Matthew Stafford. He's going to show up. He's going to work hard for you. The Rams aren't worried about it. It's part of the business of football. Another quarterback in the division, again, Lamar Jackson. A couple years ago, requested a trade. Things got sort of ugly between them. He didn't quite do what Myles did. He didn't go on Radio Row and talk about why he wanted out, but he still made it. He made his trade request known. And when push came to shove, the market sort of solved the problem and brought him back to Baltimore. And the two rode off into the sunset together, and they're still doing it now. And everyone feels great about that situation and the potential of the Ravens' future. Another example is T. Higgins. Requested a trade last year, came back this year. Bengals feels like he's so important to their success that they franchise tagged him again, and they're trying to work out an extension. I think there's some stat out there about like what their record without him was like 1-4 or something like that. So yeah, like they clearly see the value in him, but like he went out and played hard. Yeah, he got hurt. That's not necessarily a testament to anything related to the trade. But even within the Browns, there's an example of this because David Njoku famously, infamously maybe, requested a trade during the first year Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski joined the staff, and they didn't, they stood their ground and said, no, we're not trading you. And that relationship has sort of blossomed since, with David Njoku being bought in, liking the staff that is here in town, getting on the same page with them. And they now have been together for the last 5 years and have done some good things. I mean, David Njoku obviously was a Pro Bowler for the first time not so long ago in 2020, after the 2023 season. So there's plenty of examples of this in NFL history. I just gave you a recent Browns example, and I don't think David Njoku, like maybe in the early stages we questioned like his work ethic, but like ever since then it's been fine. And again, he was a Pro Bowler as recently as a year ago because of his efforts that he's put in. So he bought back in and it was fine. Myles knows what this regime is about. He knows what this team is about largely, and I understand his complaints on, the roster not being in a good spot and why he requested the trade in the first place. But now that he's bought back in, he's going to be bought back in. And the most important part of this too is legacy, right? Myles cares about his legacy. And I've said that a dozen or more times in podcasts talking about Myles over the last month, where I've made it known, like he cares about how he's remembered. He cares about leaving an imprint on this sport. In the same way, LeBron James, who left Cleveland, and he consulted with LeBron James, as he made known at Radio Row, was obviously cares about his legacy. Myles is the same. It's why after every single loss last year, he was asked specifically, like, how do you stay motivated? How do you keep your teammates motivated? And he always pointed to legacy and said, what you're putting on tape, that is gospel. Like, that is what people are going to remember about you. You got to play hard. You can't just quit because things aren't going great. He made a point in making that a thing, and he cares about that stuff. So he cares too much about his legacy, so much so that I think that's part of the reason why they came to a resolution. Like him getting to the point where he's like, all right, I'm back in. Let's figure this contract stuff out. I think that became about, yes, he may be threatened on Friday through Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network that he would sit out games. I don't think he really wanted to sit out games. I think he cares too much about how people remember him, what that would have done for his legacy. And so it's one thing to say it on March 7th, like I said. It's another thing to actually follow through on that come September, October, and beyond. So I think this all comes down to Myles caring enough and caring as much as he does about his legacy and playing football and all that he didn't want it to get any uglier than it already was. As his agent laid out, he had a change of heart, and he decided to come back on board. I'm not worried about what that means in terms of his effort. And, I think he's going to be fine. I get it. Like I talked a little bit yesterday about like the fan reaction and if they're all back in on Myles now, and that might take some time. Listen, I mentioned LeBron James. LeBron leaving the way he did, it took him coming back and then winning a championship for him to finally be celebrated again. But the effort was always there with LeBron. There was like, once he announced he was coming back, and once he takes the Cavs on that finals run he did his first year back in Cleveland, nobody was worried about what had happened back in 2010. Like, nobody was talking about that. Everyone was just focused on the now. And that's the thing that's going to happen with Myles. Everyone will be focused on the now. If he's playing at a high level, if he's playing defensive player of the year caliber, like he did, not when he won it in 2023, and I think he was at least worthy of the conversation this past year as well. So much so that he was obviously at the NFL honors for that reason. I think that puts people will soon forget. They'll be celebrating him. I don't think there's any, there shouldn't be any animosity from fans, and there shouldn't be any worry about him not playing at a high level, because it's Myles Garrett. Generally what you can expect from him. Barring injury, he'll be out there. He'll be giving it his all, and he will be impacting football games in a massively meaningful way. Now, I do think, and this is maybe the comical part of all this, we know the other part of his agent's statements after this got done through, Mary Kay Cabot of Cleveland.com, where that he wanted to get this done before free agency kicks off, which, by the way, legal tampering starts today, Monday, noon, and he wanted to get it done before that because he wants to help recruit players. First of all, a lot of these things have already been talked about at the combine, right? Like a lot of these teams were already sort of working out deals and talking to guys and agents at the combine to sort of figure out what their future together is going to look like, which is why as soon as the legal tampering period opens, you start getting all these like this team's agreeing to a deal with this guy. And then it all sort of becomes official on Wednesday, but it's all just semantics at that point. So it's kind of late in the game to be recruiting guys, but at the same time, I think the most funny part of all this is that the guy who just spent a month dragging Cleveland and talking about how they're not ready to win, they're not close, their paths and visions don't align, is now saying he's ready to help recruit people. There's something very comical and ironic about that. And I also wonder, who, like, I just don't know, like, if Myles Garrett's calling you up and saying, hey, come to Cleveland, the first question these guys are going to be asking is like, well, hey, yeah, you got paid, so I get why you went back, but like, why should I go back if you're talking about a team that isn't ready to win now? And I guess Myles could always sell somebody on the idea that, hey, we're always ready to win right now. As long as I'm here, I give us a great chance to be dominant and do some special things. And that's fair. He's got a fair point there. But there is something ironic, like I said, about the guy who just spent a month ripping Cleveland and telling everybody he could on every single platform that he could go on that Cleveland wasn't ready to win and basically stay away because I want to get away, that all of a sudden he's going to try to sell people coming here. But we'll see if it works. We'll see. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out for him. But that'll be another level, maybe the next part of the conversation when it comes to Myles and how this week ahead sort of plays out. Let's take a break from Myles Garrett for a moment. We go back to our quarterback big board. I didn't get a chance to unveil 2 new quarterbacks because the news came down Sunday, the day I was going to unveil 2 more. So we have 4 to still get to our 15 on the big board. I'll give you 2 more when we get back, and we'll see who else I would consider for the Browns quarterback position. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. This show is sponsored by Betterhelp. Taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment, but it's just as important as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with Betterhelp, you can save up to 50% per session. BetterHelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. Listen, we're just getting through the dog days of winter. We can all fall into ruts this time of year, myself included, and taking some time to talk to someone may be just the thing to help you snap out of it and get to feeling like yourself again. But therapy isn't just for tough times. It's a great tool for learning coping skills and setting boundaries in your everyday life as well. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, our quarterback big board continues. We're going to take a break from the Myles Garrett conversation because we have more to get into with it in the coming days throughout the free agency frenzy that's about to play out as well. But I do want to take a break because I got to get through our quarterback big board. I have given you multiple names most of these weeks that we've talked about this, and we have I'm going to 15 is the number, and I have 2 more names for you today that I think would be interesting players for the Browns to consider for the quarterback position, or at least options to add to the room, because at this point, maybe Myles Garrett coming back signals they could be taking a quarterback. That's a conversation I actually want to have with you tomorrow, but we'll get into that later at another time. But 2 more quarterbacks that I'm unveiling today, and we go to number 12 on the list. Actually, I should recap the board, shouldn't I? This is always the strategy here. So we had number 1 when we started this whole process. Matthew Stafford was the number 1 name on the board for obvious reasons, still playing at a high level, Super Bowl winner, great quarterback. If they could have had him, I would have wanted him. Browns, obviously, it's not going to happen. He's staying in LA. That said, the next 2 options for me were your rookies that are at the top of this class. Cam Ward for me at 2, Shedeur Sanders at 3. That brought us to number 4, which is Kirk Cousins, because I like the idea of him being repaired with Kevin Stefanski and seeing if they can maybe get something out of that. And for $1.2 million that you probably get him for, assuming he gets cut, which is, I guess, TBD, sounds like he had a meeting with Arthur Blank, and Arthur Blank reiterated the same thing, I guess, Andrew Berry reiterated to Myles Garrett, that they're going to do what's best for the team. So they might not even release him. He might not even be available. And that's a conversation, obviously, for this week. If he doesn't get released, then what do the Browns do at quarterback? And that's where all these other names come in play. Number 5 on the list was Derek Carr. Sounds like he's staying in New Orleans, so that one's pretty much off the board. Number 6 for me is Jackson Dart. Again, rookie, there's a high ceiling, chance to grow, chance to get better. I like the potential of these rookie quarterbacks over some of these other veterans. 7th on the list was Sam Darnold. 8th was Justin Fields. 9th was Daniel Jones. 10th was Tyler Shuck, one of the rookies coming out of Louisville. Another rookie at number 11, Will Howard. And that brings us to number 12 on the list, which is, for me, Patriots backup quarterback, Joe Milton. I was intrigued by the way Joe Milton played late in the season. It might have just been that last game even. I think every time he stepped on the field, he's shown something. He had a really good preseason last year that I know had people talking. And some people have sort of said that the Patriots might have, 2 potential quarterback options with the Drake May situation. They drafted him last year, but also Joe Milton sort of waiting in the wings. It's a good situation to have, is to have a potential option waiting and just in case. But it does seem like Drake May is going to be their quarterback of the future. He came on pretty strong last year. But the idea of Joe Milton, if you're taking like a flyer and you're looking for a veteran at this point, a guy you're looking for a guy who's been in the league to sort of bolster your depth chart and maybe give you something there that with some untapped potential that you could get into and explore. I like the idea of Joe Milton, and I think there's some viability there if the Browns were to consider it. And again, we're down the list at this point at our 12th best option. So I'm not saying this has to be done. I'm trying to sell you on all these guys in a short period of time here as I rattle them off. But certainly I don't think Joe Milton is going to save the franchise or anything at this point. But there's enough there to intrigue me to think that it'd be something interesting for the Browns to potentially look at, and for them to bring him in as an option on the quarterback depth chart in this quarterback room if they, find themselves tight or running out of options or ideas. I like the idea of Joe Milton a lot. And I like the idea of Joe Milton better than this next person on the list. 13th on the list for me is Russell Wilson. Some might be thinking this is kind of low for Russell Wilson. And I understand why. I do think he showed he still has something left in the tank last year, but a lot of his game was still just air it out down the field. And he could still make some of those throws, but there's still some deficiencies there. I'm not 100% sold. I think based on how the Steelers season went last year, they lost 5 straight to go into the playoffs, or 4 straight to go into the playoffs, and then they lost the 5th one in the playoffs against the Baltimore Ravens. I think you sort of saw that there's very much limitations to his game as a veteran in this league. And I'm not quite sold on the idea of him being your starting quarterback, ahead of a lot of these other names that I've obviously rattled off here. And part of the reason Russell Wilson finds himself behind a guy like Joe Milton, by the way, is because of just the untapped potential of somebody like Joe Milton. I always give a little extra credit or an extra boost to that idea. Russell Wilson at this point in his career, we know what he is. He's an aging veteran who has limitations. Joe Milton, it's man, there could be another level here, especially in Stefanski's offense, which comes with a lot of structure, comes with the ability to make a quarterback feel comfortable in the setup and in the system that you run. And so I could see him having success. I could see Russell Wilson doing the same thing, but I also could see Joe Milton maybe taking another step versus Russell Wilson. There's no taking another step with him. We know what he kind of brings to the table at this point. And so for me, he falls in at 13th on this list. It's not a terrible idea. It's not the best idea, but he makes the cut because it's an option. If it gets this far, I don't think it's going to get this far anyway. This is just kind of a fun exercise for us to explore what quarterback options would be best for the Browns. But, I think Wilson deserves to be on the list. I don't know that I'm putting him higher than 13th, though, as I'm revealing here, just because of some of the people ahead of him. I think there's better potential for, and we know what to expect at this point, given how we saw the Steelers season end last year from Russell Wilson And there's just too many limitations there for me, even though I think he showed he's not the guy he was in Denver that they thought was washed. Now, that said, one noticeable, and I guess you won't know that yet because we still have two names to unveil tomorrow, but one noticeable person I've left off the quarterback big board for the Browns, but a name that's been linked to them recently here in the offseason is Joe Flacco. I think bringing back Joe Flacco would just be a bad idea. I know it sounds like a grand old time. In reality, it's a terrible idea. I'll explain why when we get back right here on the Locked On Browns podcast. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting, wondering, and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching you with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, so you can get the most money back, guaranteed, no waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now that is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live, full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, so I said it before the break, and I'll say it again. I think bringing back Joe Flacco would be a bad idea for the Browns. And this has nothing to do, by the way, necessarily with his ability. Now, I do have my doubts about his ability. It's another year under his belt. Didn't go so well in Indianapolis. And listen, I think he'd be better back here in Cleveland in Kevin Stefanski's offense. We know what he can do. He knows what to expect. He can function this offense pretty efficiently and effectively, despite some of his propensity to throw interceptions and some of the, bad decision-making that he brings to the table. That's something that obviously Jameis Winston experienced last year. But there's some potential there with Joe Flacco to still bounce back, give you something in this offense, because we've seen it before. And I understand that is at the heart of all this, why Joe Flacco makes a lot of sense. And look, if they were to ultimately bolster their quarterback room, Andrew Berry's talked about it, this room's going to look different than it did last year, no matter what. And if they decided, hey, we can't live with our own failures, it brought us back to Joe Flacco to just add another arm to the room and a veteran at that who can maybe nurture a rookie. I get it. It makes sense from that regard. But here's the thing. The 2023 Joe Flacco experience was everything that fans could have dreamed of. I want that to just be what it was. I want it to be this beautiful memory where Flacco becomes a Browns hero and helps lead the Browns to the playoffs in this memorable season, this epic season with so many ups and downs. And somehow, some way, Joe Flacco comes off the couch to stabilize things and lead this Browns team to the promised land of the playoffs. I understand the playoffs didn't go the way anybody wanted. They got bounced in the first round. It could have gone a lot differently. It could have gone better. Fans would have been happier to see that end a different way. I get all those things. But, it was still a memorable year. It was still a year that ended in the playoffs. And Browns fans, as you know, haven't had too many of those opportunities or those chances throughout this franchise since this franchise returned in 99. So it was still a beautiful memory. Joe Flacco was held in such esteem when he left here that I don't need him coming back looking sad, looking just, like the aging, like Father Time has finally caught up with him, and then tarnishing the way fans feel about him, tarnishing the way we remember and look back on that 2023 season. There's just something romantic about it, man. And that's sports, right? Like at the heart of all this, we're all sports fans. We love having certain sports memories and remembering it a certain way. We don't want to give up that memory. We don't want to see it tarnished by anything. We want to just remember it in the moment and tell the stories the way that we want to tell them. We don't want to have it tarnished by Joe Flacco coming back and looking sad 2 years later. They had a chance to bring him back last year. They chose not to because they didn't want to rock the boat with Deshaun Watson. I got that to an extent. I also felt like it was kind of silly to do it that way because you had a guy that you could have brought in and been a real good just, leader for this organization. And also, I think, serve that role that Jameis Winston did, be sort of a support system for Deshaun Watson, even though it would have been hard because the fans would have probably clamored for him if Deshaun Watson struggled, which would have been obviously the case after how those first 7 weeks went, as we now know. But listen, I kind of understood it at the time why they didn't bring him back, but you chose not to do that. You chose not to bring him back last year. That ship to me has sailed. They don't need to try to make it right now because they're changing their quarterback room around, and it would get you some goodwill with the fans. And they think that that's the route they have to go is they change this room. No, just let 2023 Joe Flacco, the 2023 Joe Flacco experience, let that be what it was. Let it be the beautiful moment in Browns history and in Browns time that fans will remember it for. Don't try to let this, don't try to, rewrite get some goodwill here. Don't try to overthink this. I understand why fans want him back. And I understand why it makes some sense. I mean, Adam Schefter, as recently as last week, was talking about the idea that Joe Flacco could be a perfect fit for the Browns if they bring him back. And it's been a continued conversation since then, and even in the weeks prior, that the Browns could explore a Joe Flacco return. Again, I get it. I get connecting those dots and all those things. I just think don't ruin what 2023 was. Don't do it. I want 2023 to be what it was for you as fans of this, as a fan of this team. I want that to be a memory that doesn't get, overshadowed by whatever remnants of Joe Flacco remain in 2025, 2 years later. If he still can play, if he maybe there's still something there. I get it. And like I said, I do see why it's the obvious connection given what he did a couple years ago in this offense. But I just want 2023 to be 2023 at this point. If they brought him back last year, it would have been different. But, you could have argued okay, do it again and see what he can do, assuming he would have not played like Jameis Winston and been just a complete disaster when he eventually filled in for Deshaun Watson after he got hurt. But again, I just don't ruin that. Don't ruin that moment for Browns fans. So I am actually not going to include Joe Flacco on my quarterback big board because I think we just got to let that moment in Browns history rest. We got to let it rest. We got to let it be what it was, be able to look back on it fondly and not even tempt fate of tarnishing it by Joe Flacco coming back and just not being the same guy anymore. If 2 years later, he's just truly not the same guy anymore. So that's where I'm at with it. He won't be on our quarterback big board list. We got two final names to reveal to get us to 15 total names on our Locked On Browns quarterback big board. We'll unveil those tomorrow. Plus, I really want to get into, with Myles Garrett back on board, what is the plan for the Browns that they maybe talked to him about to help nurture this situation and get him bought back into the team's future that they're going to execute this offseason? Could it be that they're drafting a quarterback? Maybe, but there's actually another alternative plan that I think could make some sense too. Now that he's bought back in and that he's on board and signed longer term, we will talk about it tomorrow on Tuesday's episode. But in the meantime, I do want to thank you, Dog Pound, for joining me as always and for making us your first listen every single day. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to make sure Locked On Browns is your first listen every single day. For your second listen, you can check out our Locked On NFL Draft Show, or you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon. Tomorrow, in fact, Cleveland. Get ready for the frenzy that is the legal tampering that begins today. And we'll have plenty to talk about here this coming week with free agency starting to pick up some steam. Take it easy, Cleveland. Peace.